There's something about Jacob Collier that's just above criticism. Above people like me stepping back, with our arms crossed, like, I like that, I don't like that. It's all a moot point in some respect because he's objectively brilliant. His relentless optimism, his insatiable curiosity, his charm, his wit, his humor, his charisma, and above all, his musicality. And I truly don't think it's too hyperbolic to say this is one of the most musical people ever. Like, I only know a tiny fraction of the people ever, but Bach and Miles Davis, Jacob Collier, it doesn't seem too outlandish. His knowledge, his work ethic, his dexterity, his talent, his attitude, I mean, I could go on. His brain is great. But would I say that Jacob Collier is a great songwriter? It's a tougher question. Do I expect his stuff to live on like those other artists I mentioned, or even those with less skill who have made stuff that we consider timeless? Definitely not. And it's probably unfair to him, but that chasm between his untouchable abilities and the potency of his actual output and actual albums is frustrating. So I step forward here with some trepidation at lobbing any sort of criticism at him or his music, but I also want to be honest and try to articulate what I actually feel. So in that spirit, here it goes. Jacob Collier is about my age, so I was very much part of the same online milieu and those very early YouTube days that made him famous. His Brady Bunch style a cappella videos went viral, and he's carried that penchant for covering classic songs with very maximalist arrangements all the way through to this 5th album, Djesse Volume 4. In My Room from 2016 was his first album and was and is my favorite Jacob Collier album. I think it's the one that just feels like it has the most identity. In My Room has his best cover, I think, in You and I also love that Beach Boys cover of In My Room. And I also think his best originals, Down the Line, Don't You Know, In the Real Early Morning, and of course the centerpiece and really one of my favorite songs of all time, Hideaway, which just has this momentous melodic climax and resolution at the end that just has so much weight, so much gravitas. Even though there are so many styles, so many moods, so many genres, it still feels relatively singular and contained. It was, after all, made in his room in London, so that anchors it, I think, to a specific time and place, which isn't something I can say about the Djesse series, which feels so wide, so ambiguous, to be honest, in its scope. It brings in musicians from all over the world. You could say that Jacob is the linchpin who holds it all together, but to me it's always felt so maximal, and there are so many ideas and styles presented that it doesn't have the staying power of something that is a little more narrow, a little more cohesive and focused. It's a case of saying so much that you end up saying nothing at all. Djesse Volume 4 is constructed in a very similar way to the last 3 albums, with a 70-minute runtime. Even more committed this time to bringing in guest features because of the concept and the mission of the album, which is, as Jacob puts it, an ode to the collective human spirit by way of the human voice. The track Little Blue immediately grabbed me and has just continued to grow immensely since the album was released. I think Brandi Carlile's performance slays. The vocal melody is absolutely divine. The chord sequence on that B section chills. And the very restrained kind of Pat Metheny jazz at the end is pretty nice. I tend to like Jacob's folkier side, like on Volume 2, a little bit more than the R&B and soul and pop stuff on Volume 3. So the other song that really grabbed me immediately was Summer Rain. In part because Madison Cunningham is on the song and she's one of my favorite artists on the planet, so anything she's on, I'm in for. But also the simplicity and the openness of the arrangement is a welcome break on the album and really gives it room to grow into that incredible chord change on the bridge and the eventual reharmonization of the vocal melody. The other song that's really hooked me so far is the opening track, 100,000 Voices, which has a very unlikely progressive metal guest artist in Arch Echo. I just love Jacob's vocal tone on the song. Like, it has such a life to it. It's a little bit Chris Martin inspired. And I think it's also really bold of him to open up with something that has ties to prog and metal. You know, it's a kind of a bold move, and I think a lot of his pop-oriented listeners will be turned off by that end section. If those three tracks are my A tier, then my B tier are Never Gonna Be Alone and She Put Sunshine and what's the Indian one? It's called Rock Somewhere. And the closer, World O' World, which is a relatively traditional choral arrangement from Jacob. Again, it's a nice palate cleanser and also just a really fitting way to end this journey on something purely vocal. Bridge Over Troubled Water is, I mean, just like a world unto itself. You know, Jacob really went all out for that one and just tried to do justice to the song. With those ridiculous choral arrangements and the vocal performances, I mean, Yeba, Tori Kelly, come on. It just kind of makes me like giddy laugh in the same way that like a band like Dirty Loops would. Just a little over the top, but that's kind of the point of these American songbook covers. So yeah, besides those A and B tier tracks, unfortunately, I'm not too into anything else here, which is about, I don't know, half the album. And some of the tracks I think are just uncharacteristically generic. Like Witness Me, which is a gospel kind of top 40 pop song that just feels very predictable, very Wonder Bread. I feel the same way about the song Over You with, who I've mentioned, Chris Martin. And then Mi Corazon, when it switches to that EDM style chorus, just not my thing. And then there's Well, which is probably my least favorite thing that Jacob has ever made. I don't know what it is about it, but I just find it really grating. And you might say that my favorite tracks are very subjective. Of course they are, but that's kind of the point. You know, it's like there are so many styles on this thing that I think a lot of people are going to have a similar experience, which is very hit or miss. The chances are very high that every listener will experience euphoria at some point. But if you're like me and you're after this album experience, then I don't think this is a high watermark for that. It seems to me that in listening to interviews with Jacob and just kind of taking in everything around this album, that Djesse might be a collection and a purge of like every musical idea that he's ever had. And maybe on the other side of this is something a little bit more refined, a little bit more cohesive. Something I could look at on the wall and say, that's one piece of art. You got the frame, you got the painting. It's not like every piece of art and the walls in the gallery and the elevator in the museum and the snack area in the lobby. After amassing one of the most impressive outputs of any 29-year-old ever and touching the hearts and minds of millions of people around the world, we can really only be grateful for Jacob. But if you ask me what's next for Jacob Collier, as a big admirer, I'm hoping it's restraint. And that's my take on Djesse Volume 4. So definitely go out and listen to this album because it will expand your horizons as a listener, as a musician, if you have that background. Please like the video if you haven't yet. Comment below with what you think of just the whole Jacob Collier phenomenon. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And as always, thank you so much for watching.